Well, good morning from Canada, good afternoon in Europe, and good evening in Asia. I see we've got at least one participant from Asia as well. So thank you and welcome to this webinar. We're very pleased today to talk to you about culture management, which is something that is very important in organizations and often not well understood in organizations. So we're just delighted to be able to share this information with you. I think most of you know me. My name is Dwight Mihalicz. I'm the president of Effective Managers. I work with owners and CEOs to help them be more successful by identifying and fixing root cause issues that get in the way of top performance. And I am absolutely pleased today to be joined by Fred Stawitz. Fred is focused on culture. He really is interested in how you can help organizations be more successful by improving culture. And he's focused most recently on promoting sustainable profitability in the digital age. And digitization, of course, is a big thing for all of us now. He's a leading proponent of business culture. He's an award-winning author. He's an international speaker, and we're just delighted to have him here today. So Fred is going to start off. He's got some slides which he will walk us through in terms of the culture in organizations, and then I'll come back for the last half in terms of how do you make changes within your organization to improve culture. And then at the end, we'll have some time for some Q&A. So just in terms of logistics, before I hand it over to Fred, we are recording this meeting. It will be available on the Effective Managers YouTube channel. If you have questions while we're going through, feel free to use the chat box. We'll monitor that and try to answer questions if we can in progress. If not, we'll answer them at the very end, and we will have that Q&A opportunity at the end. So with the logistics out of the way, we now hand it over to you, Fred, to kick us off.
Oh, thank you. It's an equal pleasure to be joining you on this venture today. What is culture? Culture is often discussed in business circles, and it's somewhat nebulous as to what it actually is. So what we're planning on doing today is to give you an idea of how to view culture, how to view it in a manner that how it fits in with business operations, what impact can it have, and why would you want to manage it, and then how do you manage it? What is it that you actually have control over in terms of culture, and using it as a tool for the benefit of your organization. Next slide. So having a tool, we want to focus that on doing something, and what we'd like to focus here is on creating sustainable profitability. Sustainable profitability differs from regular profitability in that if something happens between now and tomorrow, profits go away. So we want to have create an operation, a business operation that reasonably can verify that you're going to be profitable tomorrow, the day after that, unless there's just something that absolutely is totally out of your control. But for factors that are within your control, nothing is going to damage those profits, and you're going to be able to sustain them going forward. So that's the target, and that's the rationale for why we would want to learn more about managing cultures, because we can use it as a tool to get to sustainable profitability. Next. Where are we now, though? What do we have to move in that direction? The only thing that management has that they can utilize to move in the direction of creating profits is action, and that's action inside the organization. There are plenty of things going on around us. The political turmoil, there's the pandemic, there's the march toward digitization of business operations, digital age technologies, implementing digital age technologies. There's plenty of things that are outside of the organization that are impacting on the operations of the organization. What we're talking about here is inside the organization, what management has control over and what they're able to actually have a direct influence. And so how do we get from management action to sustainable profitability? The next slide. Through managing culture. That's what we're going to be discussing today. We want to utilize culture management as a tool to create sustainable profitability, and the actions that we can take in managing culture are management actions. And so that's what we're going to be talking about. And there are 6 unwritten rules that are based in behavior science, so they're valid rules. They're simple rules, so they're easily implementable, and they're logical. Those 3 factors go into what we're going to be talking about today, because you want something that's valid, you want something that is logical, makes sense, that if you explain it to somebody else, it's going to make sense to them. If you explain it to your team, it's going to make sense to your team. And it's something that's easily implementable. You can have something that's so complex that you can't implement it. For what use is that? It doesn't help you to any degree. So we're going to go through 6 rules that are pretty simple to understand, and we're going to talk about first of all the rules, and then we're going to bring Dwight back in on the discussion, and we'll talk about what actions management can take in implementing those rules to move towards sustainable profitability. And always the goal is going to be sustainable profitability. So let's move to the rules now. First one, management action creates workplace environment. That's the fundamental premise of what we're talking about today. Management action creates the workplace environment. And the workplace environment, the importance of that is that that's what the employee experiences. In my previous book, Don't Run Naked Through the Office, I identified 4 types of workplace environments. And you'll see those on this graphic here. The green one in the upper left, a sunshiny state, that's supportive. That's where the employee gets the support they need to do the job they were hired to do. If we move down from that, management is starting to abdicate their responsibility. They're not doing all the things they need to do in a managerial role. And employees, as a result of that, experience some turbulence. They experience like a windy environment. They're being blown around this way and that way. Moving over to the right, on the lower right corner, see it's a rain cloud. If there's a low-grade contention, a low-grade conflict developed between management and employees in the environment, then that's starting to introduce additional stress. And if we move up to where there's high-grade contention, there's heated arguments, there's threats, there's all kind of things that you really don't want in a work environment. That's the stormy one where you see the lightning strikes and the red. If we look at employee experience point of view, only the sunny one is the supportive one. That's the one where the employee feels that management is behind them in supporting them in doing the job that they were hired to do. These other 3 have different levels of stress associated with them. And every time you introduce, or if you consider introducing stress into the environment, unnecessary negative stress, there's plenty of stress coming in from outside, from financial issues, from coronavirus issues, from all of these things going on. Employees are enduring a lot of stress as it is, but if you add additional negative stress in the work environment, and the work environment now can be working from home, working from the office, whatever that work environment is. If you introduce stress, then you're cutting your throat in terms of getting to sustainable profitability, because the stress is going to be a limiting factor in that arena. Next, the importance of looking at what the employee experience is because the work environment drives behavior. Behavior, we want the employees to be doing the job that we ask them to do. It kind of seems unusual that certain organizations would work against that factor of you hire somebody to do a job, you provide them the resources and the training and the support that they need to do that job. But some organizations don't do that, unfortunately. But the factor here is that how the employee experiences the work environment drives their behavior. The next slide. And the factor there is that behavior is the only element of culture that we can really measure. Behavior equals culture. So rule number 3 is equating those two things. Now there's a lot of factors that go into what actually impacts culture, and we see this on the chart on the right. There's racial issues, there's religion, nationality, language, gender, education, past experiences, potentially genes. There's a lot of factors that go into how people behave. The only one in the workplace that really makes sense for management to pay attention to is the only one that they can actually manage and measure, and that's behavior. You can't measure the influence of all the factors that go into that behavior. You can just measure and observe and measure the results of the behavior. So although culture may have a whole variety of other factors that impact it, behavior is the key one. That's the one you want to pay attention to. And that one is going to be driven by what the employee experiences in the workplace. If they experience a supportive workplace environment, they're going to behave in a particular manner. If they experience a windy, where management's not doing their job completely, they're going to behave in another way. Rainy, stormy, that's going to drive another type of behavior. Now, I used to speak at conferences back when we had conferences and people would all get together in a large room. And I would mention to them a way to visualize this is suppose the doors stuck or locked the doors and the lights went out and the air conditioner went off. The conditions within the room changed. The environment changed. Over time, it may be an hour for some people, it may be 3 hours for others, it may be a day or two for some, but gradually the behavior in that room is going to change. And it's going to change in their unpredictable manner. And that's because of the introduction of stress into that environment. People were uncertain as to when they were going to get out of that room, when the air conditioning, when the lights were going to come on, when things were going to get back to normal, quote unquote, normal. And therefore, behaviors changed. The behaviors changed by the factors on this chart over here that could be completely different for each person. You wouldn't know necessarily the person sitting across the table from you what things they'd experienced in their life, what trauma they'd had to deal with, and how they dealt with it in a what they considered a survivable fashion. So in looking at behavior, one of the key factors is managing stress. And if you maintained the ability for people to go in and out of the room, if you kept the lights on, kept the air conditioner on, minimize the stress. There's obviously stress floating around outside of that room from the environment that people are experiencing out there. But if you maintained and managed the stress within the room, then you could maintain and manage the behavior within the room. That is the same premise that we're applying here in the workplace. And as many of you know, the coronavirus situation has disrupted the normal go to work every day, go home in the afternoon or early evening, depending on the job. And as you've also possibly noticed, behaviors are starting to shift as a result of that. Behavior is linked to the work environment, and behavior is the only element of culture that you can observe and measure. So that's an important factor to keep in mind here. Next rule. Functional culture always beats aspirational culture. Now, what are these two cultures? You typically think of an organization as having a culture, and it may be there's sub-elements of the organization that have their own cultures, business units that have their own culture. Anytime you get a group of people together, then the culture is really the summary of the behaviors that they bring to the table. Within the organization, though, functional culture and aspirational culture are very important to consider. The aspirational culture are the signs on the wall. Great place to work. Your safety is our first priority. Take care of our most valuable asset, you. These are the signs on the wall. These are the Tiger Team reports. These are the things on the website that try to attract candidates to open job openings. This is what the message of the culture is. But it is the culture. The culture is what the employees experience and the way they behave as a result of that experience. That's the functional culture. That's the reality of the situation. That's what employees experience. The employees may see the signs on the wall, but if they experience, well, safety isn't our number one priority, profits are our number one priority. That's the message that we get every day from management. We don't get safety message. We may have our safety meetings and such like that, but I've looked into safety and risk management considerably for the past few years, and there's an organization, I won't mention the name, that ran a plant on the southeast side of Houston a few years ago, killed 3 people because they didn't maintain the ventilation system and they had a leak. Gas got in, and the first person succumbed to it. 2 others succumbed and died as a result of trying to save that first person. But they had a sign just like this one: your safety is our first priority, sitting out right by the street when people come to work every day. That was the first thing they see when they came into the office. Obviously it wasn't, otherwise they would have maintained the ventilation system in a manner that kept people safe. This is a great place to work. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But the point is, the message on the wall isn't what conveys meaning to the employee. It's how they experience the workplace environment. That's the functional culture. And when there's too large of a gap between these two, then there's too large of a gap between what employees experience and what they're being told or shown in the public sphere that the culture is, then there's a big indication that there's a dysfunction within that organization. That means increased stress. That means less ability to attain sustainable profitability. Let's take a look at the next slide. Culture determines productivity, safety, and customer service. These are key foundational elements of sustainable profitability. Dwight and I put together an article that I'll send out a link for that this afternoon, but it's a great article that indicates the connection between productivity, safety, and customer service and how they contribute to sustainable profitability. Now, it's useful to consider that behavior, we're talking about culture, culture's behavior. The behavior is a foundational element of each of these elements: productivity, safety, and customer service. If an individual experiences an antagonistic environment, the one that had the lightning strike on it. Obviously, they're going to have to spend a certain amount of their time defending themselves in that type of environment. Whether it's reasonable or not that they have to do that, that's the environment that management created. That's the environment that they're having to deal with. If management actually wanted them to focus entirely on productivity, then that's the wrong environment to create. The supportive environment is the one to create, because even though somebody makes a mistake, as long as they're making an honest effort to do the job properly and safely, then they know that either they're going to get the help and resources at the time that they needed to perform in that manner, or after the fact, they're going to be trained and provided the tools they need to do it properly next time. In a rather hostile environment, it's reasonable to assume that if they mess up, that they may be out of a job as a result of that. So that, as you can see, would increase stress. Increased stress reduces productivity because people are having to focus on other things, on responding to potential threats within the organization, threat to their job, threat to their productivity. Safety, the number one thing, the number one problem in safety is distractions. Stress increases distractions. People are stressed, they're thinking about other things, they're not thinking about the job that they're doing. There's a higher level of probability that they'll make a mistake if they're stressed. Customer service, somebody's stressed. We've all called up or spoke with customer service people on the phone or in person, and if they're stressed, they may feel very they may share that stress with us. In other words, as customers, we don't appreciate that. We appreciate people that enjoy their jobs, that enjoy serving us, and that's what's going to attract us to be repeat customers. So the management action creates workplace environment. Workplace environment drives behavior. Behavior equals culture. We have the functional culture, that's the real culture. We have aspirational culture, and if there's too big of a gap between those, then that's a problem. And we have culture determines productivity, safety, and customer service, because culture is behavior, and behavior are what create those three elements. Next slide. Productivity, safety, customer service promote sustainable profitability. As I mentioned, the article that Dwight and I wrote on this, if you think about the key elements of sustainable profitability, it is these three. You need a productive operation, you need a safe operation, and you need to serve a customer base. If you take any two of these and remove the third one, say we have a productive and safe operation, but we don't have customer service, that creates a problem. If you have a high productivity and you have customer service, but you don't have a safe operation, profits could go away at a moment's notice. If you remember the Deepwater Horizon event out in the Gulf a few years ago, one incident, that company lost billions of dollars almost overnight because of a safety incident. They were productive, they were serving customers, but they weren't paying close enough attention to safety. And it impacted their profitability significantly. If you have safety, customer service, but you're not producing, then you don't have anything to provide to the customers. And eventually they're going to go away. So sustainable profitability hinges on productivity, safety, and customer service, all three of those being equally focused. And as I mentioned, culture is the tool. So if we go to the next slide, we get all 6 rules. Utilizing culture as a tool, it's the factor that's in between management action and sustainable profitability. Management action can't jump to an aspirational culture and produce the results that are necessary for sustainable profitability. Management action can only impact the workplace environment. It can't mandate a type or a high level of performance. It can't mandate safety. It can't mandate customer service. It can try, and often does. But functionally and effectively, all that management action can do is create the workplace environment. And that environment drives the behavior of the employees. Any workplace environment that is less than supportive drives negative behaviors to the degree that the level of stress impacts the employee. The more stress you put on the employee that's unnecessary and negative, the more behavior issues you're going to have. The less productive behavior, the less safe behavior, and the less proper customer service behavior. So behavior equals culture. As we mentioned, culture has a whole lot of factors that go into its makeup. But if you look at behavior in the workplace, that's the only one that is manageable and measurable. All the others are important, but in the workplace, they're so varied, and you really, in some places, it's illegal to take a look at those factors. So it's very useful to simplify culture to behavior. And then the behavior drives the functional culture. Aspirational culture is just signs on the wall. That's what the organization would, the management of the organization might like it to be. But functional culture, unless it's aligned with aspirational culture, then there's some dysfunction that the organization may be experiencing, and that dysfunction cuts into productivity, safety, and customer service. And those are the foundational elements of sustainable profitability. Now, this doesn't yet get into what those management actions are that can be taken to drive this process through sustainable profitability. As I mentioned in our previous webinar, we went through 10 key factors in the workplace environment that impacted that environment. And let's switch to the next slide. Dwight's going to go through these, but I just want to mention that these are some of the key ways that management can use to impact in a positive fashion the employee experience. And the goal of that impact would be to minimize stress and to maximize support. Now, there's varying degrees at which that can be accomplished, but I would suggest that people handle stress a lot better in a supportive environment. And those stresses might come from the market, they might come from competition, they might come from natural problems that occur in the workplace. But if they see that there's a team effort within that workplace to accomplish the goals of the organization and to help everybody within the organization work together to accomplish those goals, people can handle a higher level of stress than if they see that there's adversity working against them in trying to get done what they've been hired to do. Dwight is global expert on managerial effectiveness. So let's turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much, Fred, and thank you for that very enlightening walkthrough on culture. Fred and I are collaborating on our digital readiness assessment program. Say that fast 3 times, and as we worked on that and developed what the factors were, we were very quickly putting together the relationship between the culture of the organization and their ability to implement a program successfully. So it raises the question for us, can organizations change their cultures? And this is what I'm going to be focusing in on in the next few slides, and then we'll come back to the Q&A. I do want to acknowledge Tushar and PK have both asked questions, and they're a beautiful segue to what I'm going to be talking about, because Tushar is asking about Rule 4, which is functional versus aspirational culture, and PK is asking about the role of the CEO or the owner and the executive team in this, and I will address both of those off. But if you need more information or more background on those when I'm done, do jump in. So the starting point really is around strategy, because in my experience as a management consultant, most organizations have a strategic plan, and most of them go through a lot of effort to put in place plans inside their organization. And yet research over and over again shows that organizations fail to achieve their strategic objectives 70% of the time. So that's crazy. They put all of this time, all of this effort into developing this great strategy, and yet they're not able to implement it effectively. You see this on the screen, this quote from Forbes. Dr. John Cotter, who is an expert in change management, did a macro analysis of change programs from around the world and found that only 5% are successful, 70% do not, and the other 25% are somewhere in the middle. And what's interesting about this, and why I raise strategy at this point, is that the same is true of all major change programs. So it's not just strategy that organizations have trouble implementing. If they implement a major change program, whether it be lean or whether it be a new ERP, whatever it might be, they find that at the end they're not able to successfully implement it. And that all does come back to culture. And it's summarized in one beautiful sentence by Peter Drucker. Peter has written an amazing number of books, I can't remember exactly how many, on management sciences and how managers work in organizations. And this one quote summarized it so nicely: culture eats strategy for breakfast. So no matter what you want to do to change in your organization, if you have a desire to make that change, but the culture of the organization is not consistent with those changes that you want to make, you're just not going to be successful. So it's really important to understand what culture is and how one can implement that. Either, I say, in our list of people attending today, we have a mixture of management consultants and people that are working inside organizations. So from whichever perspective, if we're as management consultants trying to help clients, or whether you're in the organization yourself, this is something that is particularly important to understand. In the work that I do with consultants, with clients, we've developed a model to try to explain how all of these things tie together. When I first used to discuss these things in my early years, we'd fill up a whiteboard with squares and circles and arrows and try to show all the relationships between the different aspects of organization performance. And it gets very confusing and very complicated. So over the last couple of years, we've developed and refined this model of a tree. And if we think about a tree as a complex organism, it carries a lot of similarities to an organization, which is a complex structure that is in place to do certain things. I'm not going to give you this in detail. On the Effective Managers YouTube channel, there's a 9-minute video which describes this, but I want to make a point for you here. And the point is that you have structural elements, which are things like your business model, your strategy, and your organization design. And then you have outcomes in the organization. And culture really is one of the outcomes in terms of how you do your work in the organization. And that culture then drives strategy, then drives performance, which then drives profit. So if we think about then how do you get from structure, our strategy and our organization design, to profit, which includes culture and performance, you have to think about, in the analogy, the trunk of the tree. And it's these three things in the middle. These are all the people functions in the organization. So what is our model for accountability and authority? How do we work together? How do we collaborate together in this organization? How is our managerial leadership system working? Are we providing our managers with the tools they need to manage, and are managers doing the managerial work that they're accountable for doing? And then managerial capability, but I'd even extend that a bit to employee capability. Are we getting the right people into the right roles so that they can be successful in doing the work that they need to do for this organization to be as successful as it can? So when you put those three things together, what we're really talking about are the structure of the organization, which is being driven, as Fred has so eloquently said, by the employee experience, which then result in the outcomes of which culture is one of them. So I'd like to change focus a little bit now, just to talk more from the change management perspective, because I think about the change of the culture as a major change management program. In fact, I think about strategy implementation as a change program, because to successfully implement a strategy, you need to change some things about what you're doing. And over the years, I've spent a lot of years in my first career, either inside organizations as an employee, as a manager, as an executive, and as head of organizations. And now over the last couple of decades, I've been working as a management consultant. And these are the 5 keys that I think you really need to be able to do successfully in order to implement the points that Fred outlined for us, those 6 secrets. So the first one is commitment. You need commitment to that change. If you want to move from that functional structure to that aspirational one where people are acting in the same way that you aspire to act, you need that commitment from the top of the organization. They need to demonstrate that change, and they have to stay with that change over a significant period of time until it's internalized inside the organization. What often happens in organizations is that you start this change program at the top, the owner or the CEO and the executive make the decisions that need to be done, they delegate it down, and then they move on to the next thing. And what happens is the change initiative tends to peter out because it's not getting the executive attention that it needs to come to your point, PK, exactly. This needs to be demonstrated from the top of the organization, and there needs to be that commitment to stay the course. You also need engagement, and Fred did talk about engagement, and this is engagement of every employee, every manager, every executive, and the owner of the organization to be engaged in the change program. So there has to be this understanding of our aspiration, what we have to do to get there, how we have to act differently to get there, and then to demonstrate that change. So that engagement, that desire to attain that future state becomes really, really important. And this is why the commitment is so important, because if you don't have the commitment, the management experience for the employees that develop and deliver on the employee experience is just not going to be there. And the third one is focus. Most organizations bite off more than they should. So they have an ambitious strategic plan, and they know they have a number of initiatives that they need to get in place to successfully achieve that strategy, and they end up trying to do too much at once. So as a result, people aren't able to focus in on those changes in behavior that are necessary for any one particular change, because they're being pulled in different directions and not really sure what the priorities are amongst all of those. And then number 4 and number 5, I think you're going to love, because this is particularly important. Number 4 is focus, and number 5 is focus. So 3, 4, and 5, focus, focus, focus. It's better to pick 1 or 2 key change initiatives and stick with those over time than it is to pick 5 or 6 and not successfully implement any of the 5 or 6 because the effort is too dispersed. So a few points, and I'm not going to spend as much time on these remaining slides, mostly because I want you to have a chance to ask questions and to comment at the end, but also because I think I've made the main points for you already. So in terms of managing a change process, there's a few things. We do have a webinar on change specifically, which you can check out on the YouTube channel. So the first one is identify the current mythology. So whether you're a manager that's in charge of the entire organization, as the owner is, or whether you're a manager of a frontline team or an executive who is managing teams of teams, you really need to understand what people understand about the organization. Where are their heads at? What is the mythology in terms of how we behave in this organization? Because that understanding is what's going to drive the behavior. You need to understand dissonance. Dissonance is that feeling inside people that the current state is not sufficient. The current state isn't appropriate. We need to change. The trouble in most organizations, whether they're small or Fortune 1000 companies, is that people tend to be risk averse, and when you implement a change program, the devil you know is often better than the devil you don't know. So there's this inertia in the organization. So you have to create this dissonance with the current state and motivate people to change. You need to continue with consistency. This is part of the staying the course, and you need to reinforce that change in absolutely as many ways as you can. So what happens in organizations, the executive, the owner has this image of what their organization is, and the employees and the managers have this kind of an image of what's happening in the organization. So that disconnect is not going to get you there. If you're always talking about the unicorn, but people are thinking about the mule, you're not going to be very successful in implementing the change program. So the understanding dissonance is really making sure that our perceptions, that you as the manager of the team understand the perceptions of the individuals, which are being driven by their filters. And Fred made some really nice points about this in the earlier slide. So we have to create that discomfort with the status quo. And the continuing with consistency, just to reinforce there that change is not a sprint. It's in fact a long distance run. What we need to do is prepare to continue to stay the course, to reinforce the change in as many ways as we can over time, so that people get used to using in the new way. So here's looking at it in a slightly different way. If you think about an organization, and I've found this to be true again in any size organization and in any sector, whether it's government, not-for-profit, private sector, whether it's small, medium-sized, large organization. If you want to engage the employees, there's a few things that you need to do in terms of the change program. The first one is you need to get this input and feedback upwards. This is the whole understanding the current mythology. This is getting information, the best information possible in terms of what's happening in the organization, understanding that and gathering it upwards so that everyone in the organization feels that they have had some involvement in the forthcoming change, that they understand that their viewpoints have been taken into account. Not everyone's viewpoints can be implemented, of course, but people have to feel that they've been heard. Once all of that is filtered in and decisions are made and the change begins, it's very important to implement the change in natural teams. So how do we model this new behavior? How do we work differently given the change that we need to implement? So at the top of the organization, the CEO or the owner is working with the executive team for the CEO to be very, very clear with them about how we're going to work differently and what that means in terms of Monday morning, how this is going to be reacted, what the consequences are of doing things well or of not doing things so well, and then implementing that in natural teams. So once the owner and the executive have had that discussion and the accountabilities and the authorities are very clearly set, then each executive has that meeting with their team and you have a cascading process to implement that. The third point is to do real work. So if you want to model changes in behavior, in this kind of an implementation, any kind of an implementation, is you have to model the behavior. So you can't just say, again, Fred made this point, you just can't say that safety is going to be our #1 priority and then cut costs on preventative maintenance. You can't say that professional development and employee well-being is our major priority and then cut the budget for benefits or for training or whatever. So the action really needs to be there to model that. So in summary, this is the slide that I put up at the beginning, and I just wanted to reinforce that really, if we want to change, you do have to have that commitment, you need to have that engagement, and you really do need to keep that focus. This is a slide that says in a slightly different way the point that Fred made about the functional versus the aspirational. So if we have an aspirational culture, it's relatively easy to go out and to deliver new value statements, to create the posters, to put in new signs, to talk the talk. It's harder to actually supplement with that action. So culture really then is the summary, it's the sum of the values of the organization, that aspirational culture that we have, that which we want to be, and the actions that we need to put in place to be able to make that happen. So in summary, points that I've made and reinforcing those points that Fred has made is #1, change is difficult. If it were easy, 100% of organizations could succeed in 100% of their change programs. Rather, it's running at about 30% success rate, marginal success rate, only 5% complete success rate. So change is difficult. So to get it right is important. More changes, initiatives fail than succeed, and change is possible, and it can pay huge dividends. And this is actually kind of the silver lining in the cloud that I've been shedding rain from in this session, is that if you can help an organization, or those of you who are inside organizations, if you can figure out how to create this culture of success, the culture of engagement, the culture where people are talking the same language and working together for the success of the organization, the success of the teams, their own successes, you are creating a factor that differentiates you in the marketplace. This is not easily replicable. It's just not. So organizations that are more successful will be increasing their margins, and they will have better profits. So it is worth the effort, even though it is difficult. As you can tell by the name of my company, Effective Managers, we've been spending a lot of time and effort in understanding managerial leadership. And there's no question from the research we've done, from the research that's been done by others, including Gallup, who this year has changed from a focus on employee engagement to a focus on the manager experience, understand that this managerial leadership is key to success in organizations. It's, I call it here, the key ingredient, both for organizational change, which then leads to the organizational success. And I purposefully use the term managerial leadership to describe those managerial things that we need to do in terms of leading and managing, but also those leadership aspects that we need to do in terms of motivating and supporting our team members. So all managers in organizations, whether you're the head of the organization or whether you're the head of the mechanics team, have to have this balance between leadership and inspiration and motivation, and management in terms of the process control, the performance management, the feedback, the delegation, and all of those things. So it's this managerial leadership then creates a link in the chain from strategy to execution in the organization in both directions. Strategy in terms of what do we have to do differently for success, but execution in terms of what's working and what's not, so you can feed that back up the chain to the executive that are ultimately accountable for the implementation of the strategy of the organization. So together, Fred and I have developed the digital readiness assessment. This is an easy-to-use assessment tool that organizations can put in place to measure their effectiveness in each one of those 10 factors that Fred documented earlier in the slides. I did mention in the chat that we'll send out a PDF of these slides to you after this presentation, so you will have those. We'll also send you a copy of the YouTube video, so you'll have access to both of these in the future. I noticed a couple of you came in late. So here's the shorthand link, or you can go to the Effective Manager's homepage and click on the services, and there you'll find the digital readiness assessment to learn more about that and learn more about how you can assess inside your organization to learn how well you're doing on these various factors. So when it does come time for changing your culture so that you can successfully implement your strategy, successfully implement your digital readiness assessment, your digital programs or digitization of different processes, then you know that you'll be able to maximize your potential for success. So I'm gonna open it up in just a minute for questions, and you can either put it in the text box or you can unmute yourself, and I think you can unmute yourself. I'll check that in a minute, and we'll get some questions for you directly on those. So in the meantime, here's some additional resources that are available for you on effectivemanagers.com. Please do check those out. You can learn more about these concepts and principles there. I did mention that we have the YouTube channel with videos that go from a few minutes on one subject to recorded webinars that give you more information in these areas. And do check out the resources tab on the effectivemanagers.com website. We have a newsletter which goes out about once a month, plus notices of events like these, where you can register on Effective Managers, or connect with me on LinkedIn or Facebook. I'm always delighted to be in contact with my colleagues around the world, whether you're management consultants or inside organizations, so we can learn from each other and see how we can collaborate for mutual success. So thank you again, Fred, for that introduction. Did anything else come to mind as I was talking that you wanted to elaborate on from your first presentation? And then we'll open it up for the general questions.
Just kind of the idea that the processes we're talking about, or the understanding of those processes, is relatively simple. It's human behavior, and it's driven by what people experience in the workplace, and it's commitment and follow through and taking action and sticking with it and making sure that it's top to bottom, that it's felt and implemented and respected, and top to bottom throughout the organization. So it's a simple process, but it's not easy, because there's a lot of factors involved in making it happen, and that's where your expertise comes into play. Is that you've done this in a lot of organizations, and you know the pitfalls and the successes of doing it right.
Exactly. Thank you. I have now enabled people to unmute themselves. If you have a question you'd like to ask directly, please do feel free. Tushar and PK, did I sufficiently answer your questions that you had asked in the first half? Yeah, I guess it's going good. Oh, got a thumbs up from PK. Thank you very much. It's almost midnight for you, PK, so you'll be going to bed soon. Lisa.
Hi, Lisa.
Hi. Did you have a question? I think I can unmute you. There you go.
The question, I just thought I'd show my face.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
It's 2 a.m.
2 a.m. for you. Okay.
Yeah. Hey, Fred.
Hey there. Yeah, Lisa's out in Australia.
Okay. Yes.
And,
okay. Well, thank you for joining us so late at night. That's great.
And Tushar's over in India. He was, I don't know, he was asking about explaining rule number 4 a little bit further. And it's, as you mentioned, I mentioned the aspirational one is what management would like to have. That's what the signs say, that's what the recruiting materials say, but that's not necessarily what people experience. And it's what people experience that's the reality. It's the difference between the unicorn. I was trying to remember the unicorn and the donkey. Yeah. And if those are too different, then people see that they're being told one thing, or the public's being told one thing, but what the reality of the situation is something completely different. And when there's that disparity, then there's issues of trust that come into that, and that's a major foundational issue in any organization, is that people have to be able to trust what management tells them is actually going to be what happens.
Thank you. I was taken in 2019 when the president, the CEO of Gallup, together with the head of research, published a book called The Manager Experience. And in there, they talked about things that we at Effective Managers have been talking about for, well, since 2012. And one of the key elements we found in our research with the University of Ottawa is that managers in organizations spend only 55% of their time on value-added work. So what this means is they're being pulled in so many different directions and asked to be doing so many different things that they just really can't focus in on those things that are most important. So what loses out? It's those change things, it's those aspirational things, it's some of their managerial work, which you can kind of put off day to day and just never gets done. So organizations, as a result, have a lot of churn, just misused energy that isn't focused in the right direction. So if we can help owners of organizations to focus in on those things and sort of find and fix those root cause issues, there's huge potential in organizations that's just not tapped appropriately.
And to add to a little bit to the question that PK Lim had asked in regard to CEO leadership defining culture, there's a culture for potentially a different culture for leadership of the organization, of upper management. There's a potentially different culture for middle management. There's a potentially different culture for the employees, and there's a culture an experience that employees have. There's a flow through from the top. The top actions set the actions of the executives set the tone of the environment of what middle management experiences. What middle management actions they take set the tone for employees, set the environment that the employees experience. How the employees behave sets the experience for the customer. So there's a flow through from top to bottom of the organization, all the way from management out to the customer experience. And it has to be managed, I think, effectively all through each of those phases, through each of those segments.
Excellent. Thank you, Fred. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to ask one question, and Fred will probably know where I'm going to come from, in terms of how do you think that the culture of management and leadership, and they're two different things, certainly have been highlighted as either being insufficient or requiring change in terms of the shift, obviously, to virtual teams and people working from home and all over the world. So they're whole new skill sets. And how do you think that's impacted culture, I suppose? And how do you think management are looking at gaining new skill sets in those areas?
That's I've spent a fair amount of time on that exact question for all the obvious reasons. I agree with you completely that leadership and management are two different things, and I think they exist in different proportions in different individuals depending on what the requirement is of the job. So they have to draw on leadership more or less, or management more or less, but have to do both. In terms of the working from home, it's sped up exponentially the move to work from home. So it's put managers in a very different situation, and I think it's made the job of managers more difficult than it has. So they still have to do all the same things. They have to build the team. They have to understand the situation in which all of their employees are. It's easier to work with sort of the introverted group who are saying, yes, working from home, but then you've got the extroverted part who are saying, oh no, I can't stand it. If one more day here without going into the office, I'm going to die. So they have to understand where each one of their team members are coming from and figure out ways to satisfy those needs. So those who need that interaction, you got to figure out how to do it in ways that make sense. I think the work at home trend is going to continue to increase. That just doesn't make sense to bring all of that labor into a central place all of the time, because there's so much work that can be done from home. So we do need to, as heads of organizations, help the managers figure out how to do better in that situation.
I guess from my perspective is, the engagement tools that they need to actually engage their teams have shifted as well. So we can move to these virtual environments, but it's finding ways to, rather than just putting it online, to actually engaging. And that's a certainly 21st century skill and a digital skill that a lot of managers don't actually possess. So it's a new education curve for them as well. So I think it's one of those areas that's certainly going to be a growth area, and I think managers and leaders are trying to wade their way through it, but are challenged by it.
And if you've got an organization where there's a large gap between the functional culture and the aspirational culture, then they're probably not going to be very effective at providing a supportive process for the middle managers to make this change. It's going to be delegated. You do it. You figure it out. You make it happen. And if you don't, we'll get rid of you. So it could be a potentially increase of stress for the people that are actually having to do the change, and it's not shared throughout the organization.
And I really like your point, Lisa, and I'd like to underline it, because it's not as simple as using digital tools to do the same things you used to do, but in a different way, because the people are in different situations. So yes, those are the tools we have, but we have to figure out how to use those in the right way for the benefit of the employee experience of each one of our team members. So that's a very good point. I really like that one. Trisha is asking what new skills for a management student during this pandemic. So if someone's a management student, what things should they be learning? So I think the conversation we just had with Lisa is a large part of that, is how do you manage virtually in a successful way?
Flexibility, adaptability.
Resilience, all of those.
Yeah,
I think all
exactly.
of those skills. And I would actually add to that is digital skills, because you as Fred said, that if there's an imbalance in the functional capacity as opposed to the aspirational capacity, then you lose it along the line anyway. If you can't engage virtually and do things differently, then you're still going to achieve your role. So I would say and argue, digital skills astronomically so. And they're significantly missing in terms of the way we engage, even in terms of when you engage in meetings and so forth. These are just minor things, but the number of people that I've seen turn up to international meetings not well dressed and not well presented, and not as if they're actually respecting the other individuals on the other side. So that's an impression that you receive, even though you may not physically be together. You still see. We're still able to visualise what we're seeing the other end. And I quite often would say, well, you wouldn't turn up to a meeting like that in a real space. Then why would you turn up looking dishevelled to a meeting virtually? Because it's showing the level of respect that you have. So again, it is learning different skill sets to how to engage another person on the other side of the screen, and also show them the same level of respect that you might if you were in an individual meeting or gathering a team together and so forth. The same as I would expect from team members, as much as we are virtually working, in home environments, that you find quiet spaces so you can have a focused conversation, not distraction. So those sorts of things, so there are different skill sets that are required by managers, and also obviously leaders to ensure that. And of course, then you add to that, your knowledge of digital skills and all the security and all those sorts of things that go with it. So I would argue that they are critical skills if we are going to engage in this ongoing virtual space.
No, I would hand it to you in a second, Fred. I would expand that to management consultants as well. So we're working with others in other parts of the organizations. We need to learn how to work virtually, and we need to learn how to leverage digitization wherever we can. So everything you said, I put an exclamation point for consultants as well. Sorry, Fred, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, I just wanted to say for the participants and anybody that watches this later on, Lisa is a global force in moving into digital, implementing digital technologies, and also utilizing those technologies in underserved communities throughout the world as a way to elevate their economic status. She's just a phenomenal force for good in the world.
Thanks, Fred.
Yeah. Lisa. Yeah. Okay, I see we've taken you several minutes past the hour. We try not to do that, but this was just a wonderful discussion, so I really do appreciate that. Thank you for all of your time. Thank you, Fred, for it was Fred's idea that we would do this webinar. I appreciate that very much. I think it's great content. I'm getting great feedback in the chat box. Lisa, thanks for showing your face and jumping into the conversation. I appreciate that. And thanks to all that participated. I know time zones, virtualization is great for people meeting around the world, but the time zone, we're going to solve that problem somehow. So either one of us, somebody's got to lose out on sleep somewhere in all of this. So anyway, thank you for those of you that are losing out on your sleep. We're wrapping up now, and we will be following up by email with a link to the YouTube recording and a copy of the slides. And do feel free to answer that if you have any additional questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay,
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Yeah.